let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in importance of
what is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you might be, and welcome to the Level Up Hour, where we talk about all things containers, Kubernetes, and of course OpenShift. So make sure to like, subscribe, and share so that everybody knows that we're out here talking about these topics. And we have a really great topic today. Today we are going to be talking about OpenShift Platform Plus. Now, OpenShift obviously is a very important part of what we talk about. And so we're going to delve into a little bit about what brings the plus in there. And to tell us a little bit more about that is my co-host, Jafar Shraibi. Good afternoon, Jafar.
Yeah, hello everyone, and hi Randy. Thanks for joining us for yet another episode. And yesterday our show will be on a little bit more than just OpenShift. So you've probably heard about DevSecOps and this approach where you can combine not only DevOps things, automation, but also try to instill security all the way within your practices. So that's what we are going to have a look at today. So I will first introduce the OpenShift Platform Plus, and then we will have a look at a quick demonstration that shows how all the bits work together. So it's not necessarily an end-to-end demonstration, but really we will focus on explaining how things are created, how things are integrated together, and basically give you all the information you need to get started if you are looking to use this wonderful set of tools.
Great. Well, it's interesting thinking about the evolution of OpenShift, where we now have single node OpenShift, which you could kind of call OpenShift Platform Minus, and then you have OpenShift, and then you have OpenShift Platform Plus, which brings some things that it's not just about DevSecOps, but it's a great way to illustrate it, but really brings some things that if you are going big with OpenShift, I think that's sort of the thing that I associate with it. The plus puts the big in there. So take it away, Jafar, and tell us a little bit about what the components are and what puts the plus in OpenShift Platform Plus.
Sure. So as you know, Red Hat has been in the Kubernetes landscape since the beginning. And since then, we've seen, I would say, the ecosystem evolve, and our customers started by adopting small clusters, then bigger clusters, then more clusters. And then we started to see that multi-cluster pattern where customers wanted to have maybe small form clusters dedicated to specific areas or specific teams or domains or geographies, etc. We also saw a need for a more reliable, highly available registry that will play a key role within that multi-cluster strategy, because if you are having tens or hundreds of clusters and they are spread around the different geographies, it doesn't really make sense to rely on just one single copy of the registry as you used to when you had only one cluster that you had to worry about. So Red Hat has made several acquisitions throughout the years, and also I would say inherited some very cool tools from the IBM acquisition and the merging of some parts of the engineering. And so OpenShift Plus basically extends the OpenShift platform with 4 new capabilities. The first one is multi-cluster management with what we call Red Hat ACM. The second one is with security for containers with the Red Hat Advanced Cluster Security, or what we call ACS. The third one is Red Hat Quay, so that brings the geographically replicated, highly available container registry that also integrates security scanning. And finally, and that's a integration that was done, I think, a few months ago. It also gives you OpenShift Data Foundation Essentials, which is basically our OpenShift storage, but limited in terms of usage and size. But it's I would say a very good foundation to start your OpenShift Plus journey. So again, what those tools bring together is this ability to embrace a multi-cluster, I would say, DevSecOps approach, because you're really able to build your applications, store them in a secure registry that is accessible everywhere with the high availability, then make sure that the containers are continuously, or the images are continuously scanned for security vulnerabilities. It allows you also to have a single pane of glass with the decentralized view that both ACM and ACS bring. So when you're managing maybe hundreds of applications across tens of clusters, or even thousands of, so we have some customers.
Scale.
Yeah, we have customers who actually run tens of thousands of containers a day on their different OpenShift clusters, and at some point in time, you really cannot go and try to log on each and every cluster. You really need something that give you a centralized dashboard, and that's what ACM and ACS do from two different perspectives. The ACM would focus on what clusters we have, are there any updates, any policy violations, any governance issues, etc. And ACS will bring the centralized security view. Do we have any network? Do we have any threats? Do we have any unsecure or images that have vulnerabilities that are being run on those clusters, etc. And ODF brings that that highly trustable storage backend for all of those components. All right. So with that being said, I wanted to really focus on showing you what this looks like within the tooling. So we're going to have a look at different solutions. We're going to talk about how to install them, and we're going to talk about what capabilities they offer, and also how they fit together, because it's not just a bundle where you buy things at a better price. It's really an integrated solution set that, when they are all combined, they bring value together thanks to the integration that have been created by the Red Hat engineering. All right, so let's dive into the details. So as we said in the introduction, OpenShift Platform Plus is, of course, intended for multiple use cases. It's not just DevSecOps, but when you think about DevSecOps, there are many capabilities that you need that are fulfilled by those combined set of tools. And that's the use case that I wanted to show for this session. So what we're going to look at is basically a CI/CD pipeline that takes our application code from a Git repository, does some application scanning, then use some third-party solutions to check if there are some vulnerability issues in terms of code, etc. Then we will build the application into a container image that will get pushed to Quay. So Quay is installed on OpenShift. We are not using Quay.io in this case. We are really using a containerized Quay instance that runs on OpenShift itself. Then afterwards, once everything is finished, we want to have some security gates that are maintained by ACS, where once the image is in the registry, we want to make sure that there are no blocking or critical vulnerabilities. If everything is fine, then we can move on and deploy the application to multiple clusters. So what we're going to be using for today's demo is, so I have two clusters, one where all the tools run, and I consider it, I would say, also the dev environment, where basically my building of the application happens. But there's a second cluster, which is staging or production, call it whatever you want. But just, we can think of it as one or 100 clusters. It doesn't really matter, because the tools that we provide bring that scaling capability where we are going to build things in one cluster and propagate those applications to the hundreds of clusters that are under management. And I will explain how that whole tool chain allows us to do that. So first, let's start by looking at what we call the operator hub, or the installed operators. And what we will see here is that we have several operators that are already installed in here. So the ones that we need, we have Red Hat Quay, we have ACS, we have also ACM. So ACS being the security solution, ACM being the cluster management, OpenShift pipelines being the GitOps tool that we will use to deploy the applications to remote clusters. We have also OpenShift pipelines, which is our distribution of the Tekton upstream project. So it's
And I'll interrupt for a moment to say that we did have a very good episode talking about OpenShift pipelines, in which Jafar walked us through that particular technology. Please continue.
Yeah, sure. So so what Tekton brings, just as a summary, because I'm sure that not everybody is familiar with all of the tooling that we provide, but this one allows us to use Kubernetes as the CI/CD engine itself, and that's basically the pipeline that we were looking at before. So what we have here, again, we have the Red Hat Quay registry, which is installed, but we do provide a very nice way of integrating OpenShift with a remote Quay instance by making sure that whenever you build your containers on that cluster that has the integration, it will automatically push all the images to the Quay registry. So let's pause for a second and think about it differently. So if you are using OpenShift with the native image, with the native container registry, there are a lot of integrations and automated tasks that happen. So you have all the role-based access that happens automatically. You have all the namespace management that is also happening natively, because it's all running within the same cluster. But when you have a separate Quay instance, you need to basically synchronize the content of your OpenShift namespaces, your users, your roles, etc., with that remote registry. And that could have been a bit tedious, because you would have to set up like your hundreds of namespaces and such. And thanks to the Red Hat Quay bridge operator, and it does what it says. So it's basically a bridge between your OpenShift cluster and your remote Quay instance. There's what we call a Quay integration. And basically, when you install the operator and create that Quay integration, you say that whenever you push new container images to any namespace within the OpenShift cluster, it's not going to be pushed to the local registry, but instead it's going to be pushed to that Quay registry that you have here. And so let's have a look at that Quay registry that we have. So that we have running on the cluster itself. So as you can see, the first thing we can notice is that there are lots of organizations that are actually mimicking what we have within OpenShift itself. So if I look at organization, I have the OpenShift CI/CD namespace, I have the OpenShift CRDA organization, and basically this is because the Quay bridge operator constantly monitors the namespaces that we have within OpenShift and automatically creates those in Quay as organizations. So you have then the ability to push and pull your content from OpenShift to Quay and from Quay to deploy those to OpenShift namespaces. So if we look at any of those organizations, Quay will also automatically set up some default robot accounts, and robot accounts are actually users that are created to basically allow you to push and pull from the registry. Traditionally, when you use OpenShift itself, there are some default service accounts that are used for those operations. And let me show you an example on, for example, the CI/CD namespace. So if we go to this user management service accounts, we traditionally have those default service accounts that are created by OpenShift, which are the deployer, which are the default, which is used for anything unless specified differently. We have the builder, which is in charge of building the container images and pushing them to the registries. And then we have the deployer who has read access to the registry to be able to pull the container images and deploy them on the namespaces. And the interesting thing is that if we look at those, basically they have automatically inherited from those secrets that have been created by OpenShift. So now these service accounts that we have on the OpenShift namespaces are automatically allowed to push and pull from the corresponding namespaces in Quay, and you don't have to do anything manually on your own. It's fully automated. There's an operator, there's a controller that looks for any changes, and if you make changes, create new namespaces, it's going to reflect that in Quay as well. So I believe there are some questions. So yes, we can pause for a second and take those.
Yeah, so first of all, we have one that's, can you share the pipeline task YAML?
Yeah, sure. So this content is going to be available, is actually available on the GitHub repo. So I will send you the links to the repo so you can have a look at it.
All right, and then we had a question that, there's been news that StackRox has been open source. And so in that case, how is ACS different from StackRox?
Well, so ACS, again, with as with any of the Red Hat tools, there are some. So the first thing is, of course, supportability. So the first one is called a community project. The latter one is a product distributed by Red Hat, and it's, I would say, exactly the same thing for all of the Red Hat tools. There can be some differences in the functionalities that are provided in some tools. I'm not necessarily familiar with the ACS drifts between the ACS and the upstream project, but yeah, usually you have some. I would say you can have some differences, especially if it's not a Red Hat upstream project. If it's a Red Hat upstream project, usually it's very close to what we have, except that you don't get the QA, the certification, and support, and all of those things. But if it's an upstream project, it's a bit different. So, for instance, if we take Tekton, Tekton is not a project just by Red Hat. We are a contributor to that. And as such, we do use Tekton as, I would say, a core engine with OpenShift pipelines, but we extend that with some capabilities that don't exist upstream, such as the ability, for instance, to look at the pipelines and maybe even go and edit those pipelines with a graphical editor that we provide in here, etc. So very nice capabilities that don't exist in the community projects when it's not a Red Hat solution.
Right. So then we had one more, and then we can get back to our walk through this. And that is, Aaron was asking, is there a standard? I like that, it's a standard way to handle SEMVer in a pipeline. How do you inform the pipeline task what the version number should be when the image is tagged?
Yeah, so I don't think there's a standardized way of
You have to do
handling
your hands
those.
like this.
Sorry? Yeah.
Never mind. Standard.
There's no standard way of doing that, but you should definitely have a standardized way of doing that within your organization. So things can be a combination of, so for instance, if you are tagging your container images with application versions and such things, then you could use those to tag your your pipelines, your images, and make sure that there's a standard. I don't know how in French we say nomenclature, meaning that it's a standardized way of naming. Yeah, it's a naming convention or a naming standard within the organization. So you know that you need to pull whatever application. Um, so you can have, for example, 3 letters that identify your application. Then you have the version of the application. Then you have whatever other meaningful things. But in the end, what matters is that we are going to use several tags to be able to push and pull the images. But at some point, we are also going to have to resolve the pull spec or the SHA of the container images when we are going to use Argo CD, for instance, to tell it which container image it needs to use when doing the deployment. There are some standards in being built when it comes to building things like software bill of material that allows you to understand what components you have in your application and that you could ship as a version package, for instance. So there are things that you can rely on, but there's no like one go-to way of doing that. But yeah, to your point, you definitely need to have a standardized way of putting those things together, because in the end you'd want to automate that. And if you want to automate that, you need to be able to say, okay, so I need to pull this information and this information, combine them, and that makes my full string that I need, for example, to pull my images, etc. All right, so yeah, so let's go back to our set of tools. So the first thing that we did within the pipeline, again, is that we have cloned a repo. Here we used a tool called CRDA, Code Ready Analytics, which allows you to scan application source code for vulnerabilities. And then we are doing some third-party tools like Maven code analysis using SonarQube, for instance. So this is just a demo. But basically, your pipeline should have those type of integration, functional tests before deploying your application or releasing. I would say your code analysis, then releasing your applications, then doing some security gates, then doing some functional tests, etc. So okay, let's go ahead and see what happens. So here with the build image, we do have I would say the source to image process that builds the application from Nexus that we have here and creates a containerized image out of it. And if we go back to the Quay registry, that's the one that we see here. So that whole pipeline takes about 20 minutes to run. So I didn't want to run it in here. So I have a previous version that has been kicked off. And you can see that this is the image that has been stored within the OpenShift, within the Quay registry, and that we will later on reference to deploy that container image. So what's important here is that this is the manifest that we are going to use to reference this image when we are going into the GitOps approach. Okay, so enough with the Quay and OpenShift integration. Let's go a bit further and go to the Red Hat ACS integration. So ACS, as you can see here, is a security management tool for OpenShift, and it can handle multiple clusters. It can show you vulnerability management for your containerized images. It can show you if you have some container images that are running somewhere on your clusters. It can show you the most vulnerable CVEs. It can also show you if there are some policy violations across the board, etc. And so this is the one that we have, the Spring Pet Clinic. And when using ACS with policies, you have basically two options. You have an option to say that you want this policy to be just an information, and it's going to pop up an event and show you warnings, etc. Or you can set it to be a blocker policy, meaning that it's going to fail whatever task or pipeline you have in there. So since I wanted the pipeline to go through, I disabled the blocking part of it. But if I enabled that, then the application wouldn't be able to proceed into the different environments unless I make the changes and make sure that there are no violations in there. So the way it works is within OpenShift, we have a few YAML tasks, so Tekton tasks that are embedding the RHEL command line, which is the ACS command line, that allows you to basically scan images remotely and check if there are any violations regarding that. And also using kubelinter, it can also check the deployment files. For instance, making sure that you are not deploying applications with elevated accounts and elevated security context and such things. So yeah, these are the security gates that we are using in here with ACS. Okay, so now let's go a bit forward. So I don't know how much time we have left, but
we got time.
Yeah, so ACS basically, as I mentioned, has this nice integration with Quay as well. So we can have a look at it. And if we look at the integrations part, we can see here that there's a Quay integration here that allows us to connect to a remote registry. And that's basically when you create that integration, you can point to a Quay instance and have ACS automatically scan the content of that registry. So yeah, basically you can say, I want to create a new integration. Here's the endpoint. Here's my admin user password that I need to be able to do things on that registry. There's another one as well, which is, I would say, for Quay.io, but you can also use it for Quay. So this is where I have configured mine. And if you use this integration, you can specify what type of integration you want to use. Do you want to scan do you want to use the ACS scanner to scan the content of that registry, or do you want to use the registry scanner itself if it has scanning capabilities? So yeah, basically here you have to provide an OAuth token that is generated by Quay, and then the integration allows you to, from ACS, directly scan the content of the Quay registry. All right, so yeah, that's about I would say the ACS integration that I wanted to to show you. So just one final thing in terms of integrations, because that's also the thing we want to talk about, is because we are using the CLI to interact with ACS to get the results from ACS, you need to generate an API token that gets passed to the task that is running in the pipeline. And that's basically how the command line works. You give it the token and point it to the ACS registry, to the ACS endpoint, and the image that you want to scan, and then it gives you back the results. So, all right, so now that we have spoken about the ACS to Quay integration, let's have a look at and the pipeline to ACS integration using the command line and the token. Let's go back and see what happens afterwards within the pipeline. So yeah, we see we have scanned the image, everything is fine. Now there's something that says update deployment. And basically what it does is if we look at this task, it's going to make some changes to the GitOps repository for the application to change the manifest of the container that we want to deploy. So let's pause for a second and let me show you what we have in terms of GitOps to understand a bit more what's going on. So if I log into Argo CD, and this is an Argo CD instance that is deployed using the OpenShift GitOps operator on OpenShift itself, I can see two things. I can see that I have two applications defined in here in Argo CD. And if I go back to the clusters, I can see that I have two clusters that are registered. This one being the in cluster, because whenever you install OpenShift GitOps, it automatically introspects the cluster on which it runs and registers it as a target cluster. But because we are in a multi-cluster configuration here, we want to be able to target the other clusters as well from Argo CD. And this is not something that you would get out of the box with OpenShift or with Argo CD in OpenShift, because it's tied to the cluster that it knows only, or you would have to manually add those clusters. And if you have tens or hundreds of clusters, it can become, I would say, a bit more complicated to manage those clusters. So here's where the Red Hat engineering came up with a very clever integration where we are using ACM, which is the multi-cluster management tool, to basically register all of those clusters that are under management in ACM within Argo CD. And let me show you real quick how this happens. So we are now in the Red Hat ACM UI, and we can see that we have several clusters. The one on which ACM runs, and a remote one that has been added to under management to our cluster. And the very cool feature that I like with ACM is this notion of cluster sets, where basically you can define those cluster sets and tag them with this OpenShift GitOps annotation. And basically, any cluster that falls under that cluster set would automatically be added to the Argo CD instance that runs on OpenShift. So it's a very clever way of, instead of having to manually synchronize your clusters whenever you create them, etc., they can automatically be tagged in those cluster sets, and ACM will automatically configure Argo CD to register them as target clusters. And that's basically what we get in here. So that's very nice, because now if I'm managing hundreds of clusters in ACM, I know that I can automatically use those as targets within the Argo CD instance to do my GitOps deployments from OpenShift. So that's, I would say, a very cool integration between ACM and OpenShift GitOps / Argo CD. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go back to our namespace, OpenShift GitOps namespace, our cluster. And what we have here is this notion of applications. And so because we have that native integration between OpenShift and Argo CD, so all you have to do is create an application definition on your OpenShift namespace, and it will automatically put that definition into Argo CD. So you can have this fully YAML-based configurations of your OpenShift Argo CD instances, and that's the two instances that you see here back to Argo. So I have the dev application and the staging application. Let's have a look at the dev application definition here. And what it says is I'm basically targeting this cluster, which is the local one, in the DevSecOps dev namespace. There's a Spring Pet Clinic project for that. And most importantly, there's a Git URL for the resources that we want to deploy. And that points to a local GOX instance that we have here. So it says that we are using a customized approach where basically we are deploying the content of environments/dev. So let's have a look at that and see what's in there. So when we are using a GitOps approach, usually you don't put the application resources files within the application code. It's usually two separate repositories, one for the application source code itself and one for the GitOps resources that you need to deploy with things such as the deployments, the routes, the users, etc. So if we look at it here, we can see that we have this environments folder where we have a dev and staging. And if we look at the dev, that's basically the one that has been updated by the pipeline 2 hours ago. And if we look at the difference in here, it's basically that the pipeline automatically updated the environment file to point to the new image that has been pushed to Quay. So if you remember when we were looking at the image, if we look at the manifest here, it's 47E0 here, 47E0. And if we go back to the CI here, that's the same SHA that we are pointing at here. So basically what it does is the pipeline will update the manifest and Argo CD, because Argo CD is continuously looking at this GitOps repository to see if there are changes, it will automatically trigger the deployment of that new container image into the target environment. And if we look at Argo CD here, we can see that it's synced the application in the DevSecOps cluster in the OCP in the first cluster. And if we look at the staging application, it's pointing to the same Git repo, but instead of the dev folder, it's pointing to the staging folder, and it's targeting the other OpenShift cluster as a destination. So that's basically what happens. If we go back to the pipeline here, the pipeline should be here. So it's going to point to the so this is going to update the manifest, and then this task will trigger the synchronization of Argo CD. But of course, you can also have an automatic synchronization. But basically, what this task does is it just triggers the Argo CD deployment and waits for it to finish. So Yeah, I think that's it in terms of integration. Just as a recap, we saw that we have so everything is running on one OpenShift cluster in terms of solutions. We have the Quay registry, we have OpenShift pipelines, we have OpenShift GitOps, we have ACS and ACM. So all of those have been deployed to OpenShift as using the operators. Then there's a couple of integration that have been set to make all of those tools work together. So there's the Quay bridge operator to automatically push and pull images from the remote Quay and not from the default OpenShift image registry. Then there's the ACS to Quay integration that allows to scan the images. There's the pipeline to ACS integration that allows you to pull the image scan results directly from ACS and use those as gates to decide if the pipeline should move forward or fail. And then there's the integration between ACM and Argo CD that allows us to register all of those all or a subset of clusters that are under ACM management within Argo CD, and then use them as target deployments for our applications.
Well, so Jafar, let me kind of pose a thought experiment, and you might kind of reach through your monitor and smack me for asking it. But let's imagine if we were trying to accomplish something similar without this particular set of tooling. Mm-hmm. How much manual process would we actually have to undertake to do this if we didn't have the sort of those discrete steps that you just talked about, basically being able to have the Quay registry and working separately from the default and being able to manage that Quay registry in a way that, gives you that control. And then the integrations between ACS and Quay and the integrations between ACM and Quay. Walk us through a little bit about what that's like in the absence of those. Where are you going to bump into problems?
Yeah. So what we've seen here is, I would say, the combined value proposition of those tools altogether. But keep in mind that first of all, these tools can work with other things as well. I mean, you are not forced to use those.
There's a long list of integrations there.
Yes, exactly. The thing is that when you use our products together, and I would say that's the basis of any good engineering, is that it should make it easier to use because we are providing a set of automations that make it easier for you as an administrator, as a user, etc. So that's, I would say, the value proposition is that we are taking care of some opinionated integrations that make it easier for you. Of course, if you don't have that, you would need to set up those things manually or create scripts that do that. And of course, it always takes time. So just the example that I gave with regards to synchronizing users, the role-based access from OpenShift to a distant registry, it's not something that we provided with the first version, of course, because the first version was, okay, there's Quay, there's an acquisition, but then we thought about, okay, so how can we make it easier for our users? And we came up with the Quay bridge integration to basically automate all the manual integration steps that you needed to do before. So I would say, yes, it's definitely more complicated if you don't have those helpers. Yeah. It's not necessarily something that cannot be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's just going to take some more time and some more hands-on to be able to do that. And
well, the thing that caught my ear, you said, well, you could write some scripts, and I used to love writing scripts. I still like writing scripts occasionally, but it's write once, maintain forever, and in a sense, by moving away from that sort of bespoke, custom-tailored, I wrote this thing, you're really putting it on us to maintain it and make all these things work, and it just removes a whole body of work that you would otherwise have to undertake to spend time on.
Yeah, exactly. And just to emphasize on that, and to give you a clear example of what we do with our engineering is, we have definitely embraced the operator pattern, in full. So all of our solutions that we saw here are installed using operators, and that means that it's very easy to automate and to deploy using a GitOps approach, where you are not writing scripts, but you are just describing, this is the desired state that I want. I want to have this operator deployed in that version. I want to have that other operator. And of course, you can customize the deployment of all of those tools using more sophisticated YAML files. But basically, what this allows you to do at some point is you can have, for instance, and we do that a lot. And there's also, for example, the some validated patterns that we provide that do that. And basically, you can have a central cluster where you have ACM or Argo CD. And because everything we configure and deploy on OpenShift can be described as YAML, you can say, okay, so here's a new cluster. It's a freshly created cluster. Now go ahead and apply all of those settings that you have defined in the YAML repository, in the GitOps repositories, and make it compliant with whatever configuration I need. So you can say, I want those 10 operators to be configured. I want it to be integrated with Quay, etc., etc. And that's basically, I would say, the value with our tooling and the I would say the approach that we have taken with operators is that it does allow you to do that. Some tools might not be based on operators, and they might require you to trigger some binary installations or scripts or whatever. And of course, it's always more sophisticated to apply a GitOps approach when you have this type of programmatic approach to installing and configuring.
Well, and I mean, aside from the effort, there's also just the risk of it not actually working the way you expect. Whereas this is going to be a much more predictable approach to getting it done.
Sure, and so this is maybe a little bit ahead of time, but there's a what we call the validated patterns that will allow us to even uh, more simply deploy all of those components using OpenShift. So basically, instead of having to install all of those tools together, we will ship a pattern that does everything for you on a target OpenShift cluster, and it becomes even simpler than how it is.
Well, this has been, as always, extremely informative. I am going to make a little pitch here that Red Hat does offer training and certification on OpenShift in general, but I'm actually very excited to share. Since we started this conversation around the concept of OpenShift Platform Plus, that we already have some training and certification on OpenShift Data Foundation, which is related, and then we actually coming out this summer, we are going to have training and certification on ACM and ACS and Quay, right? So if these topics that Jafar dug into a bit today are of interest, and if you're looking perhaps in your organization to make that step a little deeper into OpenShift with what OpenShift Platform Plus provides, take a look and see what we've got on offer, because that's going to help you with a lot of these things that Jafar talked about today. So Jafar, what else would you like for us to mention? Unless we get some questions.
Yes, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. Let me find the. Some people asked about some CI/CD YAML examples, so let me share with you some of those. But yeah, if there are any questions, please go ahead and just ask. All right. So there's the first link that you can share, Randy,
All
that
right.
shows an example of a Tekton-based CI/CD. There's
Great.
another one which is a bit more sophisticated. Uh, so no questions. Everything was crystal clear.
It was very comprehensive, sir.
Yeah, I think people are knocked down
Yeah,
by
they
the.
might have to play that back through. But actually, the thing is it's one of the wonderful things is that it's incredibly visual. And I think that's one of the things is that you can actually follow along with something that's pretty complex. And so on that note, unless you have a last parting thought, I think we are about concluded on this subject of DevSecOps and OpenShift Platform Plus.
All right. So thank you very much, and wish you a good day.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And again, like, subscribe, and share. And we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us.
Bye bye.